We need to talk about immigration because the polls show that this is the issue that's going to swing this vote. So if you're enjoying the cultural enrichment that millions of Muslim migrants are bringing to Europe, then how about 75 million more? The EU is being blackmailed by Turkey to speed up its acceptance into the European Union. If that happens, 75 million Turks could eventually have the right to live in the UK. We've already got record net immigration. We're full. 333,000 immigrants pouring into the UK every single year, more than half of whom are from other EU countries. Double the number from EU countries that they first claimed. Now 500,000 more migrants from the Middle East and North Africa who have entered Europe over the past year could make their way to Britain from 2020 under EU free movement rules. If we continue down this path of political integration, EU-mandated quotas could see us swamped with millions more Muslim migrants, just like Germany. We won't be in a position to say no. This is already putting an incredible strain on our public services and the NHS. We've got a chronic housing shortage. We've got record homelessness. And thanks to the EU's open border policy, southern European states simply waved millions of migrants through, knowing that they would head to the northern European welfare states and would become someone else's burden. Now Sweden and Germany are making their own people homeless to accommodate migrants who have nothing but contempt for our culture. People from an aggressive and regressive belief system who hate the West, even though we shower them with benefits. So unless you want parts of Britain to become Brussels-style radicalized Islamic ghettos, we need to take back control of our borders. Like any big government outfit, the EU also wants to import millions more people who will become dependent on big government. Why? Because they'll vote for more big government. Despite the official Leave campaign shying away from immigration, the polls show that this is the primary issue motivating voters. This is how we win, by putting immigration at the forefront where it deserves to be. The European Union is an economic basket case. Since 2010, every region in the world has experienced significant economic growth, except Europe. It's the sick man of the globe. The UK sends the EU £350 million a week, enough to build a new NHS hospital every single week. We get less than half of this back and have no control over how it's spent. Britain has paid more into the EU budget than she got back for 40 out of 41 years. We spent more than double on EU largesse than we saved from 5 years of austerity measures. Yet where are the mass protest movements on the left? It's no surprise how desperate the EU is for us to stay. We're propping up their entire failing system. As the disaster in Greece has shown, the EU is only economically as strong as its weakest member. Now countries like Albania and Serbia are about to join, so more of our money can be transferred over to them. This is just wealth confiscation on a continental scale. Look at how the EU's devastated the British fishing industry, banning fishermen from operating on their own doorstep. These fish markets used to bustle with 12,000 boxes of fish a day. Now look at it, 200 boxes a day. We pay the price while countries that maintained their independence from the EU, like Norway, prosper.
When Britain joined the common market, it lost control of its fishing grounds. When quotas were imposed, several other European countries lobbied the EU for Britain's fishing rights to be divided up between them. The British government was powerless to stop this.
The EU has just obliterated the English fishing industry altogether. The quota system they've got now is it's just mad.
Local fishermen were now banned from fishing in waters they'd fished successfully for centuries.
Oh, just beyond the pier over there. In fact, it might be there today, this great big Dutchman. But that Dutchman's got 25% of the whole quota of all of England. It's only 3 or 4 miles off the town, catching herring and mackerel. Local fleet can't catch herring and mackerel, and it's right on the doorstep.
There is still a prospering North Atlantic fishing industry, but only in countries that have retained their independence.
Well, look at the Icelandics and the Faroes and the Norwegians. They sell millions of pounds worth of fish to us. And they're outside the common market. But you tell me a common market country that buys fish off us, but they send the fishing boats to the North Sea to catch our fish. And it's just madness.
The EU has been paying British fishermen to destroy their boats.
Inside the EU, Britain isn't even allowed to negotiate its own trade deals. It has to fall in line with the other 27 countries. But what's going to happen to British exports to the EU if we leave? The EU takes 55% of Swiss exports and 81% of Norwegian exports, both of which on in the EU. The EU isn't going to stop trading with us if we leave. They need us. We'd be their biggest export market. We'd also be free to sign trade deals with countries that are actually growing economically and not be bound by the EU ball and chain. But aren't we taking a huge leap into the unknown if we leave? Claim the Remain camp fearmongers. Really? Well, look at Switzerland, the highest quality of life in the world, 5 times the exports of the UK, one of the lowest unemployment rates in the world, low taxes, few regulations, a GDP twice as high as Britain, the same for wages, direct democracy. The people decide when there's a referendum, not the politicians. Switzerland still trades with the EU, and it doesn't have to apply any of their endless regulations domestically. Whereas Britain has to apply 100% of them. I mean, what's not
Okay, we're going to continue with the truth about Brexit after the break. Again, on the point of regulations, even an iPhone, every iPhone sold in Europe has to have a volume limiter, which is set at the recommended EU level. That's how invasive they are into our daily lives, but we'll get more into it after the break. Also, an update on that woman who was campaigning outside a polling booth. We got an update on that coming up. This is the Alex Jones Show live, Infowars.com. Stay right there. We are back live on the Alex Jones Show on this Brexit voting day. Now, earlier, and we're going to get back into the truth about Brexit in a second, we had a report about a woman standing outside a polling station, campaigning, handing out leaflets. It's now turned out that, yes, indeed, she was campaigning for Vote Remain, and she was campaigning in Tower Hamlets, which is one of these Islamic ghettos in which a lot of people who don't really know how to vote, probably wouldn't have been that inclined to vote, would have been very amenable to, her advice. So she's standing out there telling these people, these poor Muslim people walking past, how to vote, handing out leaflets. Now, I've since checked it, it's not technically illegal, but you can flip it around. There are people with Vote Leave t-shirts who simply go in to vote. They're not campaigning. They're being told to get 100 yards away from the polling station. So again, complete double standard. There's another report. A polling station in London has been forced to remove the St. George's flag after a man on social media claimed it was a dog whistle for the Leave campaign and made the room look like an EDL rally. So you can't have Vote Leave t-shirts. You can't, God forbid, display the English flag. But you can literally stand outside a polling station with a badge on, handing out leaflets, telling people how to vote. And in fact, Breitbart London interviewed this woman and she told them directly, yes, I've convinced many people who weren't going to Vote Remain. So you can't do that. You can't even wear a t-shirt saying Vote Leave. They'll tell you to get the hell out there. But you can stand right in the doorway and hand out leaflets. Again, the amazing double standard of the Vote Remain campaign, the amazing hypocrisy and special privileges that they've been given. But we're going to return to the truth about Brexit here, finishing up with this video, and you can get this on YouTube. It's on my channel. Get it out to people. Here is the conclusion of the truth about Brexit.
What's not to like? Switzerland has flourished precisely because it's not in the EU. Why can't we follow their example? Look at Iceland, same story. Look at Guernsey. Its head of state is the Queen. It uses the pound. It has a parliamentary democracy. It has control over its own borders. It has a thriving economy, a high standard of living. Crime is virtually non-existent. Guernsey is not in the European Union. Why can't we follow their example? The EU is so fixated with regulating and controlling our every activity. They're now banning kettles, toasters, hairdryers, and light bulbs if they're not eco-friendly enough. Big corporations love the EU because they can afford to adopt its endless list of onerous regulations. This enables them to strangle their competition, the small and up-and-coming businesses whose growth is hindered by these regulations. Despite the fact that only 6% of their exports go to EU countries, small businesses in the UK have to comply with 100% of EU regulations. A salmon smoker in London had to pay thousands of pounds to comply with EU allergy regulations to say that his product contained fish. Gee, do you think the consumer would already know if they're buying salmon that it contains fish? Look at how the EU conspired with pharmaceutical companies to ban vitamin supplements. Only Big Pharma could afford to run all the safety tests, even though there was no safety issue in the first place. Independent herbalists couldn't afford those tests, and they went out of business. Look at how the EU and big corporations conspired to switch cars over to diesel fuel to corner the market. Oh, but it was all for a good cause, a 15% reduction in CO2, because they really care about us. What they didn't tell you was that compared to petrol, diesel emits 22 times more pollutants that penetrate our lungs, brains, and hearts. For a crony capitalist deal, the EU imposed regulations that actually killed untold numbers of people. The EU imposed regulations that actually killed untold numbers of people. Why would we want to remain part of an institution that's designed to screw over small businesses and the middle class? Why wouldn't we want to leave an institution that jacks up our cost of living by slapping regulations and tariffs on everything that we consume? The EU's anemic economic growth has left its member states at the mercy of mass uprisings and civil unrest. That's why far-right extremist parties are now soaring in popularity. People are getting more desperate. Mass riots are now becoming more commonplace as a result of the EU's disastrous economic policies. So in what way does staying in the EU make us any safer? The Vote Leave campaign is based on sound arguments, facts, logic, statistics. The Vote Remain campaign is based on fear-mongering and hyperbole. Cameron saying there's going to be a new world war if we leave, relying on people not knowing the difference between the EU and NATO. I mean, what an insult to your intelligence. Cameron saying that the leader of ISIS would support Brexit. I mean, what's next? Is Cameron going to claim that Satan himself is in favour of Britain leaving the EU? This is Project Fear. This proves that their arguments are baseless because all they can appeal to is irrational panic. They're relying on the tyranny of the status quo and people being psychologically averse to change. That's all they've got. They're so desperate. They're sending out instructions to voters, telling them how to tick the Remain box on the ballot. They're sending out referendum polling cards to non-British EU citizens who aren't supposed to be allowed to vote. Oh, but we need to remain in Europe to have an influence, they tell us. Really? Is that why since the late 80s, every time the UK voted against an EU legislative proposal, the UK lost the vote? 70 times. Is that what you call influence? A vote to leave is a vote for the people. It's a vote for small business. It's a vote for lower taxes. It's a vote for cheaper household bills. It's a vote for lower fuel costs. It's a vote for cheaper food prices once we escape the burden of the odious common agricultural policy. It's a vote to free ourselves of these shackles. It's a rejection of the obnoxious elites in Brussels getting fat off their thousands and thousands of pounds of taxpayer-funded expenses. It's a rejection of an institution so authoritarian that it has brazenly rejected the democratic will of the European people time and time again.
With general elections, it doesn't really matter who you vote for, Conservative or Labour, because you know that in 4 years' time, you can change your mind. This time, you can't change your mind. This time is for keeps.
This referendum is the most important political act that has happened in my lifetime. This is about our future, our freedom, our democracy, our right to govern ourselves.
What really matters is that you should have the power to remove the people who govern you. The reason why